So tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about heat pumps, and in particular, what sort of general advice we can give to people. So we're going to have we've got 3 contributions scheduled, and it's very much then open to the floor really in terms of other contributions. So I said I would speak a little bit about socializing flexibility, which is a project which we are doing with social housing tenants, exploring what their experience has been with the transition to heat pumps. We then have Trystan Lea, who's been doing amazing work adding all of the data from the Electrification of Heat project to the heat pump monitor.org interface, which is really useful for researchers and fellow geeks who are able to interrogate that information. And we also have Damon Blakemore joining us, who is an installer. And really, we were just sort of interested to get the installer's point of view, really, on what settings, how they go about deciding what the default settings should be for a particular householder, and any general recommendations that they would make. So I know that that Damon has a child at home this evening, so we will fit him in as soon as he's able to join us. So Trystan, if I'm just able to kick off with the sort of setting out some of the issues, and then hopefully the latter 2 speakers will solve all of those problems for us. Okay, so that's great. So basically, the Socializing Flexibility project is a participatory research project that we're doing with social housing tenants, and it's primarily around their experience, both with the installation and also with usage of heat pumps. And we're also doing some monitoring of their overall energy usage and of heat pump performance. And the idea really is to look at how we can reduce costs for social housing tenants. So some of this is looking at specific tariffs which might be better for them, particularly people on prepayment meters, and whether there is options for time or type of use tariff, like specific heat pump tariffs, which might be beneficial for people. And also to introduce the idea of flexibility, really. So the National Demand Flexibility Scheme, which some people may have participated in last night, where users are paid to reduce energy at certain times of the day. Despite the recent reductions in those payments, there is still, I think, some options there, particularly for those who've gone through an electrification process and had gas removed from their households. So in terms of how it's going, this is some work that we did with 37 householders, and what we've... Oh, am I breaking up for others, or is it just for you, Dom? Sorry, Dom, it's a you issue. But sorry. Okay, so we talked to people about how much they were paying for their energy use, and I guess you could take a positive from this, in that for over half of participants, their energy costs either remained the same or reduced as a result of having a heat pump installed. But we did also see a significant number of whose bills increased as a result of heat pump installations, and that's obviously a concern when we're looking at people in who potentially are more vulnerable to fuel poverty. But probably equally as alarming, really, is issues around comfort. So we found that over half of participants said that their houses were too cold in winter, and that is something that we need to be able to address, really. So the key issues that were raised is that it was a lack of responsiveness. So people said that that the system didn't work. We had a lot of people using portable heaters, either electric plug-ins or more worryingly, really, portable gas heaters, which obviously have issues around adding additional moisture, really. So that was a bit of a concern, really. We also found that the housing provider, when people complained that their radiators weren't heating up, as a result of that, turned off weather compensation in order that the radiators would notably heat, really, but obviously there were issues with that in terms of heat pump cycling potentially, and also fears of excessive costs. So one of the respondents that we visited was very put off by the initial cost of using the heat pump over that first 2-day period. The sort of commissioning period, which we might expect after works to be high, and hadn't used the heat pump at all for heating since that point. So there feels like there is a little hump there to overcome. There was a lack of familiarity that was raised for both by among support staff and also maintenance staff. So maintenance teams that came out to respond to issues were often much more used to dealing with gas systems, and generally a complexity around the user interface and a lack of user guidance. So lots of householders just had the installer manual, which is not only very thick but is also impossible for anyone of my age or older to read because of the size of the font, and not really aimed at end users, really. And that was something that we found was common, really, across all of our respondents, was issues in dealing with the user interface. We found that lots of younger people had had a less challenging experience, but due to sort of familiarity with YouTube and other sources of guidance, really. So most users weren't able to identify the functions on their heating control UI, and I have to say that in responding, and not having a go at Panasonic here, I don't think it's particularly great across the sector. But you know, I struggled to be able to express what some of these systems meant, and they were also complicated by some of the households having co-installed solar hot water, for example, and just trying to understand how all of these things fit together, really. So what settings were in place in households we visited? We're saying that this is only based on 8 household visits, so the rest is reported by end users, but that in all cases that we visited, hot water was on constant, and that scheduling of heating was in use in about half of households, with others using intermittent heating, really, so control via the thermostat. So a lot of people were oversetting, so feeling that the heat pump didn't respond unless it was set to quite high levels, so often 25 plus, and that the heating schedule was often binary, so the scheduler was used to set times that the heat pump should be on and heating, but that there wasn't a setback temperature there. And we also found a couple of households that had quiet mode enabled and who'd reported comfort issues. So I think there is some issues around understanding of what certain settings might do to your heating system. And I think these things shouldn't be a surprise, in that we're introducing new elements into people's daily lives, and we're expecting them to be able to deal with that in the same way that they might do with a gas boiler that they've currently got experience of. So this purple, this sort of light blue section here, the largest section, that was the don't know section of what people set it to. So the majority of users were either not setting a temperature at all, or were setting a temperature below 15 degrees for their nighttime temperature. So I guess the questions that I have really is around just around the onboarding process. So any recommendations for accessible end user guidance that people have come across. I think questions around optimization. So when that happens and who does that. We know from previous EcoHome Labs that we have lots of very committed tinkerers here who get access to their weather compensation curve, who get access to the make amendments to how their pump operates and all kinds of things. But what's reasonable to expect from the end user, and what does the end user have access to via their normal interface without requesting installer privileges, really? Is it possible for us to make general recommended settings, or is it too user or home specific? And also, can heat pumps be efficient and effective at heating homes with intermittent heating? Because I think one of the things that we've found is that we know that primarily our recommendation should be to leave your heating on as much as possible and put a setback temperature as close as you can, really, to your desired daytime temperature. But is that practical for people who are on prepayment meters and might have trouble there, really? So that's a quick introduction to the project. We are producing some guidance for end users. That guidance will be both general and also manufacturer specific. So we'll do a few versions. And we'll also do a version for carers, because that's something that we've had lots of requests about as a result of doing this research. Support calls really from carers who are with older or vulnerable residents who don't know how to use their heating system, and they're not able to help them with that. So that seems like a useful thing to do. Okay, so unless there are any questions on that, or anyone has immediate answers to any of those questions, we could pass on to Trystan.
Thanks, Matt. That was really good. Really interesting. Really good overview there. Yeah, a good challenge. Well, I thought I'd share very quickly. I won't spend too long. Just some of the data that we've been looking at, while being aware that this session isn't meant to be a massive deep dive into data either. So I'll just share my screen. Is that showing my web browser there?
It is. You're on.
Great. Okay. So I'll just start with. So we run a project called heatpumpmonitor.org, and it's a project where a lot of people are monitoring the performance of their heat pumps and uploading it to this website. Now, heatpumpmonitor.org is kind of a directory of some of the better performing heat pumps in the country. They're both installed really well, and they'll often have the the householder will be very engaged and be involved in adjusting sort of the settings for the heat pump, and that sort of combination of a very good install and that engaged householder in this case is delivering some very high, very good performance from these heat pumps. And it was always, for me, it was always it was an interesting question as to why. So there've been various large-scale trials over the years of heat pump performance, and often with relatively disappointing results. So the first one being the Energy Saving Trust trial, I think that was 2012, that came out with an average seasonal performance factor for heat pumps of 2.45. So for every unit of electric being consumed by the heat pump, they were producing 2.5 units of heat. The most recent study, the Electrification of Heat trial, sees that figure increase a little bit to 2.8. Whereas the data that we've been collecting on these high performance installs are averaging a seasonal performance factor of 4. So for every unit of electric being consumed, there's 4 units of heat being produced. So essentially, if you're getting 2.8, which seems to be perhaps representative of what the average heat pump customer is receiving, your bills are likely to be sort of 20% more expensive than gas. Whereas if you're getting a high-end, high performance install with the settings all tuned, then you can see a saving of 20% less. You can save 20% versus gas, and obviously you can save more when you combine that with tariffs and solar and so on. But that's sort of a rough guide of where that kind of those performance figures stand. And often people will say, well, it's not all about the performance figures, and in a way, we're using the performance figures as a proxy for running costs, because running costs obviously depend a lot on things like tariff costs and so on. So I just thought I'd just very quickly just show a couple of examples of the kind of thing that we're seeing. So yeah, as Matt said, we imported a lot of the electrification of heat data into our platform. So it's this one here. So eoh.heatpumpmonitor.org. So this is the most recent large-scale trial on heat pumps. So there's hundreds of heat pumps here, and there's some very poorly performing heat pumps at the bottom end. A lot of kind of middle of the road 2.8s to 3, and then some high performance ones at the top. But one of the things that we see is, for example, this sort of pattern was something that stood out to me, at least. So you have the heat pump come on, it goes on quite hard, and the flow temperature rises very high, and then the heat pump turns off for a period of time before coming on again, and sort of repeating this cycle. And it's got these steep ramps in temperature. There's another example here. And then if we contrast that with, say, Damon Blakemore's very high performance Viessmann install, it's much more steady. These temperatures of the system are much more steady throughout the day, and the performance here is really good. The temperatures are also quite low, so averaging here 32 degrees of flow temperature when it's 1.3 outside. This one here is Glynn's Samsung, so this is a cheaper heat pump brand, and even though there's a bit of kind of choppy wiggling about here, it is actually still running, kind of in these long blocks. room temperature is being kept quite stable, and the flow temperature again here is really low. We contrast that with this one here that's ramping up. It's ramping up to a very high temperature. So I think one of the things that stood out to me looking at the electrification of heat data was that there were a lot of systems that had an opportunity to improve the performance by basically adjusting these in this case the weather compensation curve. So a bit more work needed on sort of that tuning side of the settings. So a lot of these heat pumps, they had they had radiator upgrades. Quite a lot of money was spent on the install, but it seems to be let down in many cases just by the settings. And in this case, the room temperature, it's not like it's being run intermittently in order to boost the heat in the evening. It has a kind of steady indoor temperature schedule, but that's not because the heat pump's own kind of weather compensation curve is set too high. It's not able to get the efficiency that it could have. So yeah, there's lots of examples of like that in the data. So you can look at this contrast between the higher performing heat pumps and the lower performing heat pumps. So there's a lot that if anyone wants to dig into that, they're absolutely welcome. So it's heatpumpmonitor.org is the directory of the high performing heat pumps, and then EOH is the kind of wide, larger scales trial. Yeah, I think that's probably a good overview of those two bits of data that we've been looking at. And it's probably best to dive into it in the kind of Q&A after Damon's had a chance to.
Okay, thanks very much, Trystan. That was super interesting, and I think that's fantastic. Hi there, David. So just to say, this has been very much we very much surprised Damon yesterday with the request that he be here. I know he's been working hard all day and is at home with a sick child. So thanks very much for joining us, Damon. So as Trystan says, Damon is responsible for the highest performing heat pump currently on heatpumpmonitor.org in the UK, is recipient of countless awards, both regionally and nationally. Go on, Damon, let me give you a bit of a so we're just interested really to hear what the process is from an installer point of view, in terms of like how these settings are made and where things might be going wrong. So appreciate your thoughts.
From the start, really. From that first heat loss and that first viewing on site, that'll be the start or the end of how the system works. Is if you get that process wrong, there's only so much you can do to get that. You end up with either undersized or oversized heat pump, and then the installation itself. Then there's various things you can do to that, but it all comes back to how it's designed at the start. There's quite a lot of settings depending on what heat pump you've got. Different heat pumps work on different controls. You'll find a lot of the worst performing ones are working like on just a normal thermostat rather than it's being the heat pump's controls itself. I think that's an important aspect to when choosing a heat pump, that you need to get a heat pump with a good control. Apart from a few differences, every heat pump has the same components inside and they work in the same way. It's thermodynamics, but the control is the main part that'll give you that extra percentage that you can tweak yourself out performance. Heating wise, you just need to get your design temperature right, and then your weather curve set up properly. Your installer should really be spending half a day going through commissioning as such, setting things up right. You'll know if they haven't, if they've just turned it on and left you. That's when a lot of the problems come, and then the homeowner has to try and find what to do themselves. It can be like banging your head against the wall. So heating there's not that much, because you want long run times and you want a little setback in the evening. So then it all depends on what your work patterns are and what time you spend in the house. It's not going to be the same for everybody. If you might have a solid building fabric structure, you might have one that's highly insulated with no thermal mass. So every house is going to be different. Every person's schedule is going to be different, but the basics are still going to be the same. There's hot water, which can affect performance quite a lot as well, but hot water has a lot of ways you can achieve hot water, and depending on how you want to do it, if you're running batteries or tariff, you can charge overnight for low performance but a lot lower cost. Charging in the middle of the day when it's warmer weather instead of during the evening will give you a better performance. You might have a 200 litre cylinder that you drain 2 times a day, so you might do one charge in the night and one in the day. Store temperature, you might like to take that higher and then blend it down. There's a lot. There isn't just one set of instructions to use for one. You have to find kind of your own way and what's suitable for your household, really. I didn't know. Sorry, I'm not very well prepared. Is there anything that you want to touch on, Matt, or want me to talk about? Or
yeah, so I think, I guess it would be interesting to break down a little bit what the end user can do there, because we lots of questions raised, not just by social housing tenants, but also by members sort of saying, what can I do? So most people, I'm guessing, don't have access on a standard heat pump installed to the weather compensation curve. Is that right?
Yeah, depending on what it is, some will be fairly difficult as well. LG and such, because you'll have like 2 points, and you can't just take it up and down. You have to put like a minus temperature and a floor temperature and a plus temperature and a floor. So yeah, the best way for me doing it is always starting off colder. Mm-hmm. and building up to a temperature that you find once you're warm, we tend to not want to go down because you're warm and comfortable. So if you open all your radiators up fully on your thermostats, if you've got them, and then just control the temperature, take it down quite low, and then just keep bringing it up daily till you'll find that point where you're nice and comfortable, and mm-hmm. then you won't be overcooking your house because you're getting it to a level where you're nice. And then just your times, maybe have your setback running a bit longer than you normally would to see how your house heats up and how that reacts, rather than your heating coming on at 5 in the morning. Maybe doing it to 6, for example, if you want it warm for 7, or bringing it on a little bit earlier and running a bit of a lower curve. Is there a certain type of heat pump that majority of people have got? What you find?
I think we've got a variety of people in the audience here who've got their own heat pumps with a variety of different manufacturers. The ones that we're working with primarily in social housing are Panasonic and Daikin.
Right. Okay. So with the Daikin ones, I would look at getting the Maduka controller on there, which is their own controller. What works on a bus communication back to them, and that'll, because I think Daikin's as well running on 230, just normal stats, which cause quite a lot of problems. But if you get their own controller, that would really help. There's a lot you can do on that, and it's nice and easy to change on it as well. you can use a room influence on it, or you can use just the weather curve, and it's quite self-explanatory, and it's quite nice to use.
Okay, that's interesting. Is that's not the standard one that comes as on a standard install, I'm guessing?
No, it's the little black one, which is probably an upgrade to what they've got. Generally, you'll just get the entry level. Problem with the Dakins is they have an entry level heat pump, with an entry level control. So they're pretty basic with what you do at that point. And I'm sorry, I'm just gonna have to go. I'm sorry.
That's totally fine. Yeah, so I think we could. Thanks, Sean. So I think we could broaden this up to like a wider discussion, rather so that it's not just me getting all of my questions answered. So anyone has Elaine? Go for it.
First to say that this is really fascinating, and thanks for organising this, because it's really great to see, the first-hand experience that social housing tenants are having, and it's sort of sad in a way that they're having such a bad experience, and this is really sad on so many fronts. But on the positive side, it's really good to identify that there are the problems out there, rather than just flying under the radar. So the work that Carbon Co-op are doing to actually do those surveys and find out what problems people are having, is sort of like the first, I suppose, the first step. And I suppose what Trystan was saying, it sounded to me like, I suppose there's a thing of like, if you're having problems, is the problem the installation or is it the settings? So it sounded to me a little bit like, from what Trystan was saying, that there may be some solutions that just lie in the settings, which is also great news, because obviously it's much easier to go and change a setting, or to empower the householder to better operate their settings, than it is to do install. So that's like really, I suppose it's good news if that's the case. I suppose one key question would be, like, if you're going to the doctor, the first thing is to sort of like know how sick you are. So even if like my heat pump here, I don't really have any idea whether it's, I'm trying to follow all the best practices and all of that, but I don't have any idea whether it cycles often or it doesn't cycle very often, or what the flow temperatures are. So I suppose the first question would be, how do you like self-diagnose how well you're doing without, and I know like taking part in open energy monitor or heat pump monitor involves sort of installing all of this equipment and stuff, and like it sounds quite intimidating to me, to be honest, that you have to sort of almost like replumb your system or find somebody who'll do it for you. And sorry, I'm going on for quite a long time here, but like there's such a shortage of installers anyway, so you almost feel like you're wasting. I'm getting an expert here to sort of like to come and like install these like heat pump monitor gadgets. That feels like a bit of a luxury to me, when that same installer could be going out and installing more heat pumps in the world. So like, are there ways, I suppose, of self-diagnosis, not necessarily cure, so if I have a problem, then I may call in expertise to cure my problem, but is there some way of actually knowing that I have a problem in the first place, and how much of a problem I have? And so sort of like, are there any tools for self-diagnosis that are not that don't involve like major plumbing and electrical operations in your house?
Over to you on that one, I think, Trystan.
Thanks, Elaine. I guess this whole topic of like settings, and I guess we're in like in an unfortunate situation where a lot of the settings are very difficult they're very difficult to set or use or understand. And, even for experienced installers, and you have to go into these installer menus and put in usually generic passwords, but, to get at some of these things. I guess take a step back. What seems to be often the case is that the weather comp settings are set too high, so they're left at too high a temperature. So what we mean by that is that they're set at like 55 degrees or 50 degree flow temperatures. So I guess for people coming from a gas boiler, where you're used to seeing the temperature on the dial being like 70 or even 80 degrees, maybe there's a perception that suddenly dropping to 50 degrees is now low temperature. And there's sort of two things here. It's like, one is, what temperature does your system actually require to keep the house warm, versus what setting has actually been put in the heat pump. And so there, I guess in an ideal world, we wouldn't, for mass adoption and mass rollout of heat pumps, this is not a scalable solution to have every single one of us going through the settings, adjusting the weather comp slightly, seeing what the result is, going through some like long trial and error period to get to an optimum setting. So, there is, I think the direction that things will need to move in is towards this automatic optimization. So, and some heat pumps do that better than others already. And there's also pieces of kit called optimizers, which you can put on a heat pump to automatically do this. So I think, Damon is a great example of, by spending that half day extra and probably much more time over, in repeat visits, helping the homeowner get to the right setting, that would be one approach, is where the installer helps the householder to really tune that system. But I guess, we're seeing that maybe the wider industry isn't valuing that skill as much as it should. Valuing that kind of commissioning and helping the householder get to the right, get to that right configuration. So I guess there's different ways you could come at it. It could either be something that has to become a more important part of the installation process, that there's more time allocated to commissioning by the installer, and that skill is valued. Or there could be like a combination of that and the heat pumps themselves being much better at self-optimizing. I mean, for those of us, say helping in social housing, like the work that you're doing, Matt, there's a role, by understanding these concepts and understanding how weather comp settings can be set on existing heat pumps, there's an opportunity there to help householders go through that kind of tuning without having to do it, without expecting the householder to go through that themselves necessarily.
Or even the householder to know that they need to do that tuning, like that's valuable in itself. Like, even if it's not the householder actually doing the tuning, or it's like, even if the householder can be in a situation where they just know my heat pump is doing well, or my heat pump is not doing well. And I know if my heat pump is not doing well, I can call in people to help. But if I don't even know myself whether it's doing well or not, then it's very difficult as a householder to know what to do. Yeah. Thanks. Sorry, I just butted in there without.
Yeah, absolutely.
No. I mean, I think just for Damon's benefit, I think so Elaine's question was around self-diagnosis, really. So what householders can do to know how their system is performing. And we all know that a heat pump monitor system is like the gold standard, but there's a bit of a cost barrier, particularly for retrofitting on existing systems for some. So just any thoughts on that?
You could look at just the monitoring that the actual heat pump does itself. They will all give you a SCOP, Siemens performance value on your control, whether that's just energy in and energy out, and you have to divide that yourself to see what you get, like on the LG. So SCOP isn't everything, but it's always a good factor of how that performance is in that situation. There's a lot of other variables to it, but when you get to the nitty gritty of it, if that's low, generally you've got issues. So from that point, you can then look: is your house getting warm? Is there some radiators? Are you getting warm enough? Usually if you've got poor performance, you're not getting warm enough. What's your comfort temperature like? So there's all little livable things that add up to the bigger picture, and then at that point you come like, right, I might need to get someone in there.
That's great. Thank you very much. And we got a question from Anna.
It was actually me. I'm her partner, Andrew. So my background's mechanical ventilation heat recovery systems and into passive house. Done a lot of work on social sector sites and stuff like that. And just my gut thing is that the only way that householders will know that their systems are not performing adequately is on their bills. Basically, they'll be complaining they've got too high a bill, so they're in fuel poverty. Asking for any greater engagement from the vast majority of householders is just never going to happen. In my personal experience with ventilation systems, you've got to keep it effectively so that these systems, once installed, perform properly without people needing to continually monitor, continually check on them. Sorry, that was all I wanted to say. Oh, there was one other thing actually, and that's I think there's a real danger of conflating seasonal performance factor with actually energy saving, because if you leave a system on continually, you can have a very good seasonal performance factor, but you might not actually be in the house for 6 months of the year, and the house happily being very efficient with no reason to use that energy. So I'm not putting it in the extreme there, but there's, to get that clearly in people's minds of, that not to just focus on the one thing, but look at the actual energy input into the dwelling. So thank you. Yes, it's lovely to be here. So I've just jumped straight in with no formalities.
Thanks, Andrew. That's great. So I guess what we're sort of saying is that there is a role, like a role for an optimization process, and maybe because I get like with a lot of I guess what's the role when you have a heat pump installed in summer, for example, like when does that optimization happen? Who does that optimization? Is that a new role within the system that we need to create, or is that already met?
I think we optimize it. For me, some of the optimization controls, I've fitted quite a few of them, and usually on the heat pumps that don't have a good control themselves. If you design that system and you set it up right, you shouldn't really need that much optimizing. You're just initially replacing that heat that's been lost from the house as such. So I'm still on the fence with the optimizations, because from what I've seen, they've not improved any system that I've put them on, and these have been systems that have been bad. And yeah, so I'm still like that. The commissioning is important. You've got to be commissioned properly and correctly. Like you just said, about same with MVHR, you have to make sure that commissioning's right, or you're always gonna have problems. It's the same with the heat pumps. If that bit's done wrong, it's hard, and the individual installers will know what that's meant to be commissioned to. That's the issue when you're going back to site after and trying to commission something else that you've got no idea of. All you can do is look at something like Open Energy Monitor to find out what it's actually doing, because a lot of the time these manufacturers don't give you that much information. That's the issue, doing something after the fact.
Yeah, I have another question on that, but I'll let Sam go first.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's a difference in, so one approach is saying I have a certain temperature I want to achieve and I want to minimize the amount of energy and cost it takes to get there. But it sounds like a lot of people run their systems in, I have a limited amount of money, I want some hours of hot, and I will sacrifice, it not being hot. I'm not going to reach the comfort level I want, and I'm going to turn it off when I've hit too much money. And I think people know how to run a gas system like that. They know that they'll have a few, however many comfortable hours they can afford to be putting in, and maybe we don't. Is there a way to kind of come at that angle to how do I optimize a heat pump?
Problem you've got is gas is cheap, electric's expensive. If you're not getting that performance on your heat pump, you're going to be putting in a lot of electric during that period and probably using more electric in that short period than you would over that long period.
But I think the thing is that reducing the number of hours you have heat isn't a solution, because it costs. It doesn't save you any money, I guess.
No.
But yeah, is there any solution if comfortable would take I don't know 10 units of cost, and you're saying what can I do with 8 units or 5 units? What's the approach, and is it running the whole thing at a lower temperature, and you're never warm enough but at least you're never freezing? Or
possibly, or shutting down rooms that you're not using. This is all not great for how the system runs, but there will be ways of doing that, but and just living in your comfort rooms as such, it's an hard one. Tariffs, maybe looking at like something like that's was causing during the cheaper hours, heating your house up warmer than what you normally would, to then kind of lose some of that heat in the times where the electricity is more expensive. It's not the great way to go, because you're wasting energy getting it up there, but taking your house to a higher temperature, then bringing it down. But we're talking about things that shouldn't really be happening, should we? We need to do something about the spark gap. The electric needs to come down on cost, and then we'd be able to run it differently. I don't think there was any definitive answer at the minute for that situation. If you've got an heat pump, not that I'd be able to give you any pointers to make it work. I'm sorry.
So I'm going to abuse having the mic and just. So I guess a quick question I have on that is it so? Are we saying that primarily we're looking at that this is about optimizing for the building? So that's like a fit and forget process that we can go through that shouldn't need seasonal adjustment and should survive like change of resident, for example, or change of tenant.
I think you're always going to change it with a tenant. Everyone lives their lives differently. For some people, 19 degrees is warm enough. Some people like it at 22, 23. There's not one rollout situation where you can just do one thing and it's going to please everybody. That's the difficulty with doing this and trying to optimize, because you're optimizing for that household. there's no, it's not, you can't just turn it up, you know, and if you're paying 24-25p a unit of electric and you turn it up, your energy's just going to be used up, your money's going to go down. There's not, unless that system is performing well, there's no way you can have what you want without costing you a lot. That's the reality of it, really. It's there's nothing you can, again, let's see, there's not, it's hard to, I can't tell you anything to do. It's hard. It's not possible to just turn it up and heat it up and then turn it off. You know, you're going to induce your cycling. You're going to use a lot of electric. It's going to be bad for components on the heat pump as well. You'll see more energy usage when it's cycling. It's going on and off. You see more energy usage when it's in higher temperature. You can't bring the energy usage down then unless you're getting a good coefficient of performance. It's all relatable in every area. It all comes back to the same to the same factors, and that is if you've got a poor installation, you're going to have high bills, and you're probably going to be cold in certain times. Which I know is unfair. It's not right, but it's hard to say anything just to get out of that just by giving information.
That's really useful. Thank you, Christian. Welcome.
Hi. Sorry, I just wanted to jump in and ask, because I think we recently discussed it with another group of people. So if we're talking about social housing, or if you have put a heat pump in based on very little insulation in your homes or in the buildings you're living in, and obviously one way of reducing the bills would be to put insulation in. So maybe the landlords could do that, but my question, I guess, would be if that trouble when you're getting your heat pumps, they're usually sized on what your house is when you get the heat pump, right? So they have to deliver it to the kind of heat loss that you have at the time, and you can't even if you think maybe in 2 years' time or in 1 year time we have the money to put some better windows in and so forth, you then have that heat pump that is potentially too large. So my question, I guess, is if your heat pump is oversized, is your heating cost, your COP or whatever it's called, COP, is that going significantly down, and are there certain heat pumps who can deal with that better, without costing a fortune, because you have the wrong size or something like that? So you have a 12 kilowatt rather than an 8 kilowatt one. What's the difference there in efficiency, and is it worthwhile putting that insulation in, or are you basically buggered because you are kind of now, someone put that massive heat pump in, and even if you insulate it, you're still going to have massively high energy costs? So I guess, I don't know, I don't have a heat pump yet, so I'm just trying to get my toes into it, so I'm trying to ask that. I don't know who can answer that, really. Maybe Damon.
The one of mine on Open Energy Monitor, what's performing quite well is that's actually 10 kilowatt, but the house heat loss is 6 kilowatts now. We insulated under the floor post installation, so we knocked around about another 2. It coming at about 8.1 on the heat loss report, and that's now, I think it's peak, Christian, about 5.9, 6 kilowatt, I think.
Yeah.
And that's working well. You just drop the flow rate, but then again, that is a more expensive heat pump, so you have more control over what you can do with it. I'm not sure.
Is there?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean,
go on.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So it's like, I think Damon's frozen there. Or is it me?
No. You're still moving.
Okay. Yeah. So we see certain heat pumps deal much better than others with being oversized. So the Viessmann is obviously a great example of one that works very well when oversized. The Valence also seem to work fine when oversized. The ones that seem to struggle more are the Dakins, because you've also got this other thing where you have, so the 9 kilowatt to 16 kilowatt So you have various sizes that you can buy. So you can buy you can buy a 4 kilowatt Daikin, a 6 kilowatt, and then an 8 kilowatt Daikin. They're all actually the same heat pump. They've just rebadged them. And then you've got a 9 kilowatt, 11 and the 16, and that's all the same heat pump. Again, it's just been rebadged. So if you've got if you've got a heat loss, well, let's say you've got the 9 kilowatt Daikin, you've actually got the 16 kilowatt. And what we've seen with that one is that if that one is oversized and you then downsize the heat pump, so you switch from a 9 kilowatt to an 8 kilowatt heat pump, an 8 kilowatt Daikin, you suddenly get quite a good performance improvement. But that's very, very unique to that Daikin model line. So it's not like if you it's a completely different story with a Viessmann or a Valent, where those heat pumps really do manage to work quite well when they're oversized. So yeah, you'd still see, in your case, Trystan, if you started with an oversized Viessmann or a Valent and then you insulated, as long as you drop the weather compensation curve at the same time, you should see a performance, the performance should stay pretty similar, or if not, but slightly better.
Sorry, just to follow up then. So what is it that actually, I mean, you're talking about Daikin, so it's a brand thing, but I mean, it must be a technology. Some of them, why are some better than the others? I mean, what should I look out for if I look for a heat pump? The
control.
Which brand? I mean, other than money, of course.
Is Vauxhall better than Mercedes? They are.
Sorry?
It's like if you compare it to a car, if you get a Vauxhall and you get a Mercedes, they are slightly different. The price tag is different. They are built differently.
Well, I'm just going to see if anyone. I will just ask if Trystan or Damon have any responses to that, and then we will hand over to. I'm not sure if it's Andy or Anna, but for that.
Yeah, there is a price difference between the different brands. So it seems to be that. And also just a different approach to the control and that side of things. So it seems that the Valents, the Viessmann, the Nebis, they all have this good control of like low, of mild weather modulation. So when they're cycling, they cycle very well. But some of the other brands don't do that so well. Their controls aren't as good. But you can take, for example, like a budget brand like a Samsung, and with a little bit more tuning, you can actually get them to work really well and deliver. So it's not all about spending a lot more on a more expensive heat pump, but it's just that those brands often have better controls. It's just makes it easier in effect.
Okay, I've got Anna, and then I've got Sam.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, like you were saying about the 8 kilowatt and the 10 kilowatt, or whichever one's the same unit rebadged, and how far they might modulate down to, and how efficient they are at different outputs. Where do you find that information? I find it very hard to find that information.
Yeah, usually in each manufacturer will bring out a data booklet that has it in, but even them, you can't really trust on everything they say. You look at some Valents recently, and especially the 7 kilowatt ones, they're not delivering what the output states in the manual. So it's not black and white, as with everything with heat pumps. They don't make that data readily available for installers. We struggle to understand some of that. So from a consumer point of view, it's a challenge. Your best thing would be to email into technical, ask them specific questions and get a response that way. but even then, I've done that myself, and I
Yeah, 'cause
haven't
they
got the
don't even
response.
So one,
they'll tell you a peak out, but they won't tell you like how far it modulate down to on any of the ones
you
that
can
I
get
found, or what the
you can get a
efficient.
minimum. It'll bring up a minimum temperature with outside temperature, and then a seasonal performance figure at side of that in minimum load.
I think you had something like that, and then we'll pass over to Sam.
yeah, yes. One of the things that we're hoping to do on Heat Pump Monitor, or planning to do soon, is you'd be able to basically go onto the site, go to brand or make, and then model of heat pump, and then it would show you information about what the real world collected data is on minimum modulation and then the maximum output, and also some comments in terms of just the experience in the community in terms of, okay, we found that this one modulates, works really well when it's cycling. This one we've, customers have really struggled with. So you can just get that kind of real world data based information. So I think that would be really powerful, because that data, that information is unfortunately is missing at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. That would be great. Yeah.
Thanks, Trystan. Sam?
So I wanted to ask about sort of specific setup that I'd seen at in-laws installation. So they'd recently had heat pump installed as part of the Warmer Wales scheme, and that setup had a smart TRV on every radiator and was set with the room temperature on the heat pump control panel really high. I think it might have been 25 or 28 or something, and then they were using the TRVs to set what temperature they actually wanted the room to be, and turning rooms on and off by moving them from something like 12 degrees to 18 degrees as their make this room warm or not. And I wondered, that seemed really weird, but I didn't really know enough as to whether that was or not. So yeah, in terms of if you have a mix of a temperature on the heat pump and on TRVs, is there any advice on what to do there?
Yeah, the general advice for like high performing systems is to avoid using TRVs for like room temperature control, apart from as like an over temperature cutoff. So like if you've got a lot of solar gain in one room, then it might make sense to be able to reduce the output on that room. But most of the time you want to set the TRVs to be like a maximum temperature cutoff. So let's say you're aiming for 20 degrees in the house. You might set the, it is difficult to set TRVs to be that precise, but if you could say, you could set the TRVs to be like 23 degrees. So then you've got like this, your main controller is going to be the one that controls for 20 degrees. And then, because the heat pump really needs, this is the sort of thing you see on a lot of the electrification of heat data is, you've got a weather comp curve that's too high, so the system's going too hot. The heat pump's being turned on and off based on, probably, mostly the main controller sort of room thermostat. But it could also be TRVs as well. So you could have loads of zoning going on, micro zoning. And that sort of combination of like too much micro zoning, too high flow temperatures, you're just going to get poor performance. And like, it seems like it's probably, it's quite basic for those in, aware of this stuff, but it seems to be really common. Like when you look at a lot of that electrification of heat data, there's just so many systems doing that.
It seemed to me that having the heat pump be having the sort of main control and knowing that it was that temperature would allow it to work better, rather than being in the case where the heat pump thinks it's not reached the required room temperature, but all the PRVs are blocking it. That seemed like a bad thing to be.
Yeah, because if you had, you'd end up having the heat pump sort of working too hard, wouldn't you? And like just maybe trying to push heat into one room and then going hotter, depending on how it's set up, or it might just be cycling away like crazy, and that.
Okay. I'll swap them over. I'll swap over how the control works for that next.
It's also a misunderstanding of building regs as well. People think that you have to fit TRVs to comply with Part L, which isn't fully correct. So you'll find that a lot of stuff like that, new build and social housing, that a lot of TRVs, but unless you're suffering from a lot of solar gain, like if you've got a lot of glazing or you've got a high factor of electrical equipment, what would overheat, then generally when you're designing it, you design for the rooms to reach the temperatures that you'd want, and that'd just work off your weather curve. And then, as Trystan said, you just limit the rooms as such that you wouldn't want to overshoot that temperature. So, if you had a south-facing house, we might use the TRVs on the back to stop the solar gain that you get there. So, yeah, it's not a great way to use the smart TRVs, to be honest.
Okay.
In a normal domestic size house, if we're looking at something with a big footprint, then possibly.
Yeah, it's not. It's bigger than my house, but not huge.
Raf, you've got a hand?
Yeah. So if installation is so important, how can I tell as a consumer this installation was done right or to the spec? I'm getting a top job instead of yet another one of those, and I will be left with a problem to sort it out myself. Does it make sense?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, that's you're saying that the installation, knowing if the installation is correct, or
yeah, because it looks like that's the most critical bit of the heat pump installation. So how will I know? I'm getting a top job done here, because it's not about the heat pump being used or components being used. It's how they are put together.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So I mean, it is a very big topic. There's lots of parts to it, isn't there? So it's it's about that total system design that Damon does very well. But I guess you might see things like if you haven't got enough. But what the radiator spec is, how much, how hot does that actually? Do you need to actually run the system, and then does it have? There's lots of parts to it. How much zoning is going on? Is there like? I mean, if it has, it's not necessarily the case that a buffer is definitely a bad idea, but if it's not being configured or put in well, then that there can be issues there.
Okay, so I'm guessing that's way too wide question.
Yeah, I guess and then kind of you could approach it from what's the ideal installation and get a really optimum install. And within the context of this discussion this evening, and Matt's question about these systems, these Panasonic systems, it would be interesting to know what's the potential to improve the performance and lower the running costs of those systems as they are, and how much versus having to go in and completely rebuild those systems. There might be some small things that would be worthwhile doing, that in terms of actually changing the system design, but what can be done with a lot of the systems where I mean, is anyone on the discussion who is in that position of having had a heat pump installed recently, and you've got really high bills, and you're wondering, what can I do to get it running a bit better?
I mean, that's promising. So I guess
The wrong people on this call, so
it's all the tinkerers on this call. So over to Marianne, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, because a lot of the stuff that you presented, Matt, and also there's some research just being published about the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund that basically is saying people are getting stuff fitted with no information about it at all and no handover. So I wanted to ask Damon, kind of what's the process that you would normally go through with if you just install a heat pump in someone's house? Like, what kind of information do you give them, or what do you talk them through? Do you have a fixed process, or does it depend?
It depends really on customer as well, how deep they want to go. I'd spend all day with them talking to them about it if they wanted. But basically, foot controls, show them electrical side of it and stuff. Show them basics on controller, set the curve, the temperatures, go through a schedule with them so we know there's one set up. Ask them what the hot water, how they want the hot water setting up as such. And then any questions that they've got. And then I'll send them a full handover pack with installation instruction manuals, the heat loss report, the DNO, everything that they've got. So if I were to disappear, they'd know. They could get someone else. They could have all that information. One key thing about the heat pumps I use is they've also got remote monitoring. So that means I can access them from my house. So if there's an issue or we need to talk to something, adjust the curve, I can log on, and I can change data from my end and change things. So usually over the first 12 months, it's emails and phone calls back and forth to get that right. You can't get it right on commissioning day. Like you just can't. There's always tweaks that you've got to do. So over them first 12 months, I'm always in touch with them and just go through, which I'm guessing not a lot of people get. That might be quite unique, which it sounds like it might be tonight. So yeah, I don't see how they can just install it and walk away on that day and leave you with this all new piece of kit that you've got absolutely no idea about and something that isn't easy to set up. It's it miffs me quite a bit.
I suppose I'd just say as well that from experience with other building stuff, this isn't a situation that's unique to heat pumps at all. And I've seen like gas systems and district heating systems and all sorts that have had, it's the same thing of like not valuing that time spent explaining, commissioning properly and explaining things. So I don't know how we get over that like more globally, because at the moment it relies on people being good.
Commissioning's a job in itself. Like you've got to get that right. It's as big a part as any stage. You've got design, you've got installation, you've got commissioning. They need to be done correctly. Like if there's a weak link there, it's broken. You don't matter which part of that. And really, you want that same person doing all three. You don't want someone in office designing it. You don't just want someone turning up and putting pipes in, and you don't want someone coming who's had nothing to do with installation just to start turning things on and off. You need to, your customers, your tenant, they've invested in you. That you've got to give them that time, and it all comes from fitting combi boilers. You put it on wall and you walk away. That's where it comes from. You could go that, turn it off. You just turn it in cheap gas. You turn it up and down, which is industry's a mess, and it's hard. I think what needs to come out is, it's been something I've been meaning to do, is make a list of questions like for an homeowner. So when they've got it done on commissioning day, like A to Z as such, like ask these questions, and these are basics, and have a place to write down and get them to fill it in, which should be doing anyway. It's kind of like a benchmark, but even on benchmarks that you get, they're not that good. They're asking for stuff that's dated and that they don't fit anymore. So just a simple 10, 15 questions, do this and show me and talk them through it, and don't let them out of the house until they've done it, you know, lock them in, get that, because once they've gone, you're not going to see them again, you know, unless it's that's problems with a lot of bigger companies. And I worked in social housing for 15 years. Did my apprenticeship through Reverend Cow, so I've seen it all, and I've seen how it all works, and it's not good. It's not good. So yeah, once I get that done, been on my list for about 18 months, I'll pass it Matt, and then he can put it in there. This will give me a push to get it done now.
Thanks, Tim.
That's great, thanks. So I've got a quick question from me, and then from Elaine. So I guess in terms of these questions, and then from Camilla. Thanks, Camilla. Yeah, I think I guess I have a question around how much information is too much information from a householder point of view. Just like what should be exposed to householders in terms of control of things like the weather compensation curve. And I guess a recommendation would probably be, in terms of the questions to ask, is what's the password? What's the password that will give me installer rights? Because we've seen a number of people raise issues with problematic heat pumps where the installer is no longer in business, and they don't have they struggle to get access there. And just wondering if you've any like tips on that, or like any thoughts on how much is too much info.
It all depends on the person. You know, as I was saying before, some people just want basics and they can't comprehend like the whole weather compensation, everything. So you have to keep it fairly simple for them. Mm-hmm. Some people like just want you to show them everything. So I think you've got to judge that and on who your customer is. Mine it's probably a bit different for me because I don't. People come to me for wanting it, so they're interested in that product, and I spend that time with them. So from a social housing point of view, it seems like you're just getting told you're having them. This is it, and then you might not be that interested in it. You know, it might be on your bottom of your list of things that you want to learn about. So, it's kind of hard to judge. Passwords usually are generic, and technical should be able to give you that. They don't usually let you change them. Mm-hmm. And I've never actually met anyone that's actually changed one, because if they're not setting them up right, they're not going to change the password. So usually if you just ring, if it's Samsung or LG or whoever it is, they should be able to tell you it. And a lot of time they make it quite hard, so it's usually just like 4 zeros or 4 ones or 4 nines. So yeah, that's where I'd go.
Okay, that's great. Elaine, is that your hand gone down? And we pass on to Camilla?
Yeah, pass on, yeah.
All right, great. Camilla, up to you.
Yeah, just a quick question about zoning. I know zoning is not recommended, but I did wonder if there was any situation where you might have where you're living in a downstairs, mainly living in the downstairs, and you're not that bothered about heating upstairs, that you might actually zone it, and then occasionally, let's say you had visitors or something, sort of take the hit and and use upstairs or something like that. Is there any situation when that could work?
I've done that. I've got a customer who, an elderly gentleman and his wife, big 4-bed detached house, all kids has moved out, very well insulated as well, and a biggish footprint, I think about 160 meters squared. And we've just put a zone valve upstairs, and it just shuts off upstairs, and that just runs on a thermostat. And when that drops to 18, below 18, it just opens it up. All downstairs they keep at 21, and that we're running at 4.4, I think, last year, and that had been in for a full year. I was quite dubious, and I didn't really want to do it, but I tried it because at worst I can just open valve fully, and it's been working well. You just have to make sure there's a few things that you've got to make sure. You've got to make sure you can achieve that flow rate, what your heat pump needs, and you've got to have enough volume there for it to be able to defrost and work sufficiently. But that's probably too technical you don't need to know that information, but your installer, it would need to work that out for you to be able to get that working. Where that wouldn't work is if it was a little circuit and it'd be detrimental then to the heat pump. You'd have too much power and it couldn't get rid of it and it couldn't modulate low enough. You'd end up in that situation where you're just chasing its tail constantly in high energy usage. So it needs to be done at a certain point with certain conditions met.
Just to be clear, so when you say 18 degrees upstairs, so it is still heating upstairs. What can you explain what you mean?
So all I've put a separate thermostat that just doesn't do anything with the heat pump. It just opens and closes the valve. That could be set to 12, 11, 21 or whatever, but that just shuts off the valve to upstairs when it hits 18 degrees. It rarely ever goes below that unless it's colder weather, and then it will open up and keep it shuts off again at 18 degrees. So it's just like having a big thermostat on the landing.
So presumably you need a reasonably one of the better, like a Valent or a Weissman or something.
Yeah,
so
this were 10 kilowatt Valent. Yeah,
modulate down quite well. Yeah.
Yes, and can control that as well, because it's not just about the bottom end; it's about how it steps and it brings it back in. You'll find a lot with the third party controls like the LGs. They just fire on and off constantly, and you've got no control. The control is the big thing.
That's great. Thanks.
Well, thanks.
Thanks both. So I've got Brett. Brett, welcome to EcoHome Lab.
Hi there. One question I asked Damon with the valves, and I'm going to come back to that in a second, but with the installation and operation in general, I feel it would be beneficial if videos were being released to people on how to use them. I've had many years in working in social housing and working with tenanted properties. And only recently, I got a mid-20s, relatively educated young man call me out telling me the TRV wasn't working. He's English. He's grown up with these all of his life. He was turning it in the wrong direction. And I'm just thinking, you know, if some people are so challenged by a simple TRV, then how are they going to cope with some of these systems? And okay, I myself, I'm dyslexic. I get by with my reading. I do fine. But I know that some of the processing and everything just takes a bit longer. I'm not young any longer. And I feel having a video, a simple video, a simple management would benefit a lot of people. As for Damon, with the question about the thermostats that you were just mentioning, I know this is not going to go down well. In a shared house situation, could you use that per room?
No, because you would have it's a zone valve that controls it, so you'd have a motorized valve. If you'd want it per room, you'd be looking at like a smart TRV that you could actively control. If it was a radiator system.
Okay. Yep. Smart TRVs. Yep.
Yeah, something like you don't need something basic. The Hive TRVs work like that. It was as the gentleman was saying earlier about that house that had smart TRVs in all the rooms. But again, you'd need to make sure that the system can handle it and run with them shut off, and because it will be detrimental if used in the wrong way, if they just put on and just used.
Yep.
So,
thank you.
So I've got Claire and I've got Trystan. Unless Trystan, was your hand for as a response to one of the previous questions?
No, just another point. So I'll wait. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Claire. Over to you.
All right. Thanks. Sorry, I arrived half an hour late, so I'm not sure if I've missed a bit of this, but I know in general that heat pumps respond slowly and therefore it's not good to be turning them on or off. But I just wondered if there's any sort of rule of thumbs. Like at the moment, I'm on Octopus Cozy tariff, which has 3 different rates. So when it's on the cheaper rate, I've got mine set at a higher temperature, and when it's on the more expensive rate, I've got it down a couple of degrees. But I'm not sure if that's actually a good idea, because I don't know if it uses more energy to go up and down a little bit, even if it's only 2 degrees, than it does to stay on the higher setting. And similarly, sort of on the back of that, I know you wouldn't just turn it off if you were out for a day, but if you're away for a week, is it worth putting it down lower? Does that save energy compared to having it on all the time, even though it would have to heat back up again? I just wondered if there's any sort of rule of thumb for how long you need to be not there to make it worth turning it down low, and what the difference in temperature is that would not cost more to have at the more expensive and cheaper rates. Sorry, that's a bit complicated.
That is a brilliant question.
There were a paper that come out. I think it was Heat Geek that did it last year, and they tried overloading the house in times when it was cheaper, and it used more energy than it did when just having it on the previous one. But again, that had come down to the household and the rate that you're going to use, the rate that you're going to lose this energy as well.
No,
if you're out of the house, there's no point in you. Yeah, there is. It's what I mentioned earlier. It's just so hard to give you that, because you could have 2 houses next door to each other with the same amount of people in family, but different usage. It's difficult, but there's no rule of thumb. As for oh God, what was that other thing you mentioned then? My mind's just gone blank.
Going away for a few days.
Oh, when you're not there. Sorry about that. When you're not there, there's no point.
Yeah, I think we lost him. Yeah.
Did you want to come in there, Trystan, while Damon reconnects?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess I imagine what Damon's going to say is not that it doesn't make sense to leave it on, for extended periods when you're away. I certainly turn mine down to quite a low level, maybe like 12 degrees or something, if I'm away for a week. But then I've got like remote, I can control it remotely, so I can turn it on like 2 days, or it needs to be at least a day before, because of the slow heat up, really 2 days to get to the same comfort level.
I can do it remotely as well now. I've finally got my brain around it, but it was a lot to get to grips with all the different apps, which is I think what you've all been saying, and you've got to really want to do it and have that sort of mind. So I don't think, not being derogatory, but Mr. and Mrs. Average aren't really going to want to do that, are they? Unless it's a lot simpler.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting because, going back to Matt's first, one of those first slides about, that this kind of combination of issues being, I guess there's certain situations where a little bit of optimization, we can get a system to work better, and there's little optimizations here and there, like, where, how many days before and that kind of thing. But let's say someone in a situation where the house is too cold, they're really worried about this responsiveness thing, and then the cost when they do turn it on full. And I think it'd be interesting. I think what would be interesting to see more work on is that situation where someone is really has a financial limit on how much they can spend on their heating, and how to optimize it for that particular person. And also within that sort of, because if you look at the cost on the coldest day, it's going to be really high. So if you're on a prepayment meter where you have to top up the meter on that day, that you're going to go through credit so quickly in those colder months, whereas the people who are on tariffs where you pay monthly, and that even if your costs are, of course they're greater in the winter, but that kind of financial impact on your outgoings is distributed across the year, because you're paying on a kind of fixed monthly rate, aren't you? So it would be interesting to do some work where you go, okay, someone has literally, they've turned their heat pump off, they're too scared to put it on, and then somehow give them some certainty that you've optimized the heat pump to work well. If it's going to cost more than this threshold over the next 4 months, then the people running the study pick up the tab.
Yeah.
If it's below that, then you pass the savings on, but you sort of agree some kind of like long-term running cost and try and get it to work really well for the customer and that for the occupant in that situation. Because then you could think, right, we will optimize it to run that bit longer, so it does have a bit more time to get to a comfort level, so that responsiveness issue isn't such a big issue. But you need to be able to somehow decouple those things of what the cost is on a 0 degree outside day, because if you're just watching that and then you're turning it off, and then you're gonna get really cold, aren't you? It's
okay. So we're 5 minutes over, and we've got many hands in the queue, which is always a sign of a fantastic EcoHome Lab. So thank you very much for that. And I think it's, this is an ongoing debate. I don't think we've solved all of the issues tonight, but we've got a lot better idea of where we're going. And that's largely to do with the fantastic data that we're getting from Trystan's system, and the excellent work that's been done by fantastic installers like Damon. So I'd like to thank both of them very much for their time tonight. It's really appreciated. Thanks everyone for your contributions. Really appreciated. We might try and write this session up, I think, because there's still, I think, a lot more to discuss, and perhaps we'll run something, a similar session in future. But just thank you very much for all your presentations, and hopefully we'll see you at the next EcoHome Lab.
Thanks a million. Great session. Very interesting.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye bye.